All right. Well, we are so fortunate today to have a very special guest. As you heard in our intro, our guest today has numerous credentials. The work that you are doing, Dr. Katie Hirsch, in your lab and have done to this point in time is outstanding and so appreciated. So we are very honored to have you for this episode and dive into many areas of looking at fueling the female athlete and some nuances and things related to the research that you've done. But welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
All right. Well, I wonder too, just for listeners that may not be familiar yet with who you are and some of your background, it's always fun to hear your athlete background, like your sporting endeavors to date, kind of your progression in sport, and then as that relates, if at all, to how you chose this current career path, would be awesome to hear.
Yeah, so I grew up doing all the sports. I've always been just a very active person, but really fell in love with running. I ran cross country and track in college at Truman State, which is in Northeast Missouri, and just loved it. And honestly, I showed up there really only caring about running really fast and wanting to learn everything about running really fast. That was just really where my mind was at. So they had a really awesome exercise science program there. I showed up and said, I guess I want to do physical therapy, but fully knowing that's not actually what I wanted to do. I just didn't know what else I could do in the sport and exercise space. So through that time, was really lucky, got involved. They have a really good undergraduate research program there, and so got involved with some research studies right away. Took my exercise physiology class, fell in love with that, took nutrition, took a really big interest in that. And so ultimately, I still was trying to sort out, what does a career in this space look like for me? But it was really important to me to keep the exercise and nutrition together. I wanted something where I could address both of those pieces because for me, they were inseparable. I couldn't do my exercise at its best without proper fueling, and I really couldn't have the performance and health piece with just the nutrition. To me, they really needed to stay together. And so through some, spaces, I ended up at UNC Chapel Hill, actually through a Truman and running connection. So I did master's and PhD with Abby Smith-Ryan. She was a Truman alum, also ran cross country and track there. And that just blew my mind when I showed up in her lab, just opened up a whole new world to me of what applied exercise and nutrition research could look like. So learned so much about body composition, metabolic changes, supplementation, nutrition, and that's just really where I fell in love with research and asking these deep questions. So I spent 6 years with her, learned so much, owe a lot to her. And then that led me to Little Rock, Arkansas at University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, where I worked with Arnie Ferrando and Bob Wolf in their lab. They've done years of amazing protein and muscle protein synthesis type research. And so went there for 2 years, learned all about stress physiology and the muscle. And it was kind of during that time my work took that turn to really focusing on women's health. Up until then, I had done a lot with sex differences, and then kind of that wave of interest and funding came for women's health more recently. So we really started to tackle that, really started to look into the menopause transition space. And then in 2022, I moved to South Carolina, started my own lab, and so carrying out that work here now with my students. So that's me.
That's pretty exciting, just listening to your background and high level athlete into exercise science, and you Well, you teed this up perfectly with the segue into our first major question for female athletes, and that is protein. So I'm glad you spent a good time with Dr. Wolf also. But so much is being said about protein these days, and obviously we're going in the female space right now. But what can we just unwrap this right now? Like, what do we know from the research about protein needs for the active female? And maybe we talk about the premenopausal years first, and then menstrual cycle phase. Let's wrap all of this into premenopausal female protein knowledge, and where are we at currently?
Yeah, I love that context. That's so important in the nutrition space of who are we talking about and who is this for. So premenopause, active women, the RDA is 0.8 grams per kilogram. People are usually aware of that. But I like to point out, and I think most people are sort of aware of this, but maybe don't understand why, that recommendation is really only meeting the needs of people that are just like kind of existing is what I'm going to say. They're not doing anything outside the norm. We know from research, and there's tons of evidence, that anytime you start adding consistent exercise, and especially as that volume intensity increases, you move into the athlete regular training space, your protein needs go up. We've got to repair, rebuild, all of that. So higher protein needs there. Anytime you have someone in a calorie deficit, your protein needs goes up. We need to protect that muscle, put back protein. And then also just anytime our body is in stress. Stress can look a lot of different ways. Am I sleep deprived? Am I in a heavy training period? Am I ill? Did I have surgery? Am I pregnant? Am I postpartum? All of those things increase protein needs. So really most women need higher than the RDA. The RDA just usually doesn't quite make the cut. And so the recommended range, generally somewhere around 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, is a pretty solid range for most people. That comes out to 20 to 30 grams per meal, and then maybe 10 to 20 grams across 1 to 2 snacks throughout the day. So that should cover most people. Now, if we're going to move beyond that and do really heavy training, we might individualize and do more, but those are pretty solid.
Should protein intake be adjusted based on the menstrual cycle if they are, two-part question, one, if they are not on birth control, and second, if they are on birth control? Do we need to periodize the protein based on menstrual cycle?
Really good question. In the science, right now, we don't have strong evidence that it needs to change a lot. And so there's been some studies that come out recently looking at changes in muscle protein synthesis. Working with Abby Smith-Ryan, we have some data in review right now coming out on some of that. And in a premenopausal, healthy young female consuming adequate protein, if you're checking those boxes, it's probably not going to make the world's biggest difference. Now, the caveats to that, and where I don't think we've quite sussed out and where we need to look further, and maybe we don't even have the tools to fully get there yet, and that's some stuff my lab's working on, but I think during that perimenstrual period, so we're talking whenever the period happens, 7 days before that, 7 days after that. So about a 14-day window around when the period happens. We know during that time, that's when we see highest symptomology. That's when the body is going to be more inflamed. It's breaking down, especially when the period's happening. And so that, I think, is a time we haven't characterized specifically very well, and when there's probably more potential for when protein could be helpful in offsetting some of that. So I think with the menstrual cycle, no, it's not a cut hard dry, but I think we can be strategic. If I'm having trouble recovering, especially during that luteal high hormone phase leading into my period, maybe that's a good time to take a little bit of extra to help with that recovery and offset some of that. There's also neat data pre-sleep. Can it help me there? And so if I'm having trouble sleeping during that time, which can happen, that can be a strategic use. So I think being strategic and knowing your body is where we can maybe implement.
Would you adjust that range, Dr. Hirsch? You mentioned the 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. Would you adjust that range or just go higher on that range for those times?
Yeah, I would push to the higher end. You can maybe go up to 2 grams. Okay. Usually, I wouldn't think it needs to be anything crazy. So something really practical, am I just adding in another protein shake, which is just like a quick 20 to 30.
Right.
So it doesn't need to be anything wild, but just maybe a little extra dose there.
Okay. Does it matter if a female is on OCPs, oral contraceptives? I mean, does that change any of this?
Hard to tell right now.
Yeah.
So once we start splitting between those hormone profiles, the data gets even a little bit hairier. Right now, it doesn't seem like it needs to change, again, super drastically. The other thing about being on like an oral contraceptive, it does just flatline your hormones and removes that variability. So you're no longer experiencing that big drop that happens going into the period or big fluctuations. So probably doesn't need to change for them very much. They're not experiencing big fluctuations or changes. But if there's, switching from the placebo to active and you're noticing something, you could implement some extra there.
Okay.
Oh, I love what you're saying, Dr. Hirsch, because you're touching on things I think people forget about, like listening to your own body. How are you actually feeling with that symptomology you're referencing? But then also the context of the woman or female is like, what kind of athlete are you? What kind of training? What are your other inputs and outputs? And so some of that I think gets lost in some of the generalizations. And that also there's a range to apply. It's not necessarily just one number for each person, which brings me to another question as we transition to talking about our active and athletic women in the perimenopause and maybe in that, menopause, postmenopause life cycle stage. There's talk of like 2 grams of protein per kilo body weight for all these women, or 2.2. And I'm wondering if still there's that range that might be best, or other considerations for determining protein needs. Is it higher for all women or athletic women in the peri and postmenopause? If you could fill us in there based on what you've seen in research.
Yeah. So what happens in the younger women a little bit, young muscle's really resilient. We see this in males and females. It just really adapts well and can handle a little more stress. As we age, again, males and females, the muscle just isn't quite as resilient anymore and needs a little extra boost to stimulate it and to help it recover. And so especially as women start to go through that menopausal time period, we see that maybe ramps up even a little bit more. As those hormones are fluctuating a lot and we're losing that consistency and that hormonal fluctuation pattern, and especially with that overall drop in estrogen, it just creates a more stressful, inflammatory environment within the body. There's a lot changing and happening, and it's trying to adjust. And what that does, from what we've kind of seen, that seems to maybe increase what we call anabolic resistance that happens to everybody as we age. As we age, our body just doesn't get as stimulated by the exercise, by the protein that we're doing. We need a little bit of extra to really get over that threshold and stimulate it the same way as we would in a 20-year-old or something. So that seems to get a little more hairy for these perimenopausal women. It's just a little extra. And so I do recommend a little bit higher protein intake. We've seen one study in the literature that suggests around 35 grams per meal instead of maybe the more recommended 30. And so then I think a big thing that starts to be an issue, though, some women feel like, oh my gosh, I've got to increase this protein intake, and now I just feel like it's all I eat and it's all the time. And that's where we can start getting into some work that I've done in the past with how do we time that out and spread it out. You don't have to eat it all in one shot. A good dose helps because it helps with stimulating the muscle. And especially when we do it around exercise, the protein and the exercise are synergistic. And so they don't just add together and give you an extra benefit, they actually both maximize each other. And we can really turn that on. And so a lot of what we've looked at is, okay, keep your meals the same, really prioritize good, high quality protein, and we can get into that in a little bit. But also, can I get some in before I go work out? So now my body gets extra stimulated during that time. We really turn on that muscle turnover. And then can I get it after? to help immediately start supporting that recovery and keep promoting that metabolic stimulation. And so this has been my favorite thing to talk about with women. A lot of these women just think about like, oh, I gotta like keep my muscle for some reason. Muscle, I guess it's good to be strong. I guess like it helps with my functionality. And those things are awesome and key and really great. But there's also a lot of metabolic benefits to stimulating muscle. So anytime we eat protein, anytime we do good quality, higher intensity exercise or lift weights, something that's really stimulating our muscle, that metabolically, when we stimulate, we're increasing this turnover of the protein in our muscle. We're breaking down the old broken proteins, putting in new ones. So now our muscle's going to function better. That process also is super energy costly. And so by driving that turnover, we're now increasing our energy expenditure. We're using calories. The calories for that come from fat. So now we're burning some extra fat. That's going to help with our metabolic flexibility a little bit. So now we switch between carbs and fats better. We're enhancing just our metabolic health. That can help within the body composition. Just all things really spiral from that stimulation of muscle. So by getting all of those things together, you're really helping offset that metabolic dysregulation that can start to happen during this time, and really kind of help offset some of that.
I think you're touching on another area we were interested in hearing from you about is a lot of women who are in that perimenopause, postmenopause, they tend to maybe cut their calories a little bit more with body composition changes that may occur, and they're exercising on top of that, so there might be more fasted exercise sessions or maybe more longer period of time with less feeding. Just the overnight fast window might be longer, and so it sounds like that may not be the best thing for when we're thrown in exercise, and to your point, like metabolic health or metabolic dysregulation that can occur. And where's the protein fit in if we're fasting? Could you touch on some of that? And even I was curious, the study that was published not long ago where you looked at the older crowd and doing different meal frequency and different protein distributions, if that comes in here, would be super.
Yeah, so many good things here. There's kind of 3 parts to take out of that. Yeah, during this perimenopausal time, women are seeing these body comp changes. A lot of them are trying to offset maybe the weight gain, the fat gain, especially you're seeing redistributions of fat more around the stomach region. Nobody loves belly fat. And so they do what society tells everybody, which is restrict calories and exercise more. The problem with that is there is kind of a limit of how far you want to take that. And we already know from the research in premenopausal women that most female athletes are under-consuming, just not eating enough to meet those energy needs to actually exercise well and keep the body healthy. And that carries over into this period. And so then you have these women that are like restricting even harder because they're like, oh my gosh, my body's changing. I don't like what's happening. They do what they're taught, and now they've restricted further. The problem with that is the female body is so sensitive to calories and carbohydrates especially. And those are the things that they pull back. And so then we start stressing the body further. We get a stress from the calorie deficit. Then they're trying to exercise really hard. They've got that stress. Then you've got this perimenopausal stress. My body's changing and adjusting and inconsistent. And now we're just layering on stress after stress after stress. I didn't even mention the life stress. I didn't even mention the fact you're not sleeping well, and so that's another stress. There's a lot going on. And so by not fueling your body to an appropriate degree, you're really just kind of exacerbating that, and we can start to see some of that metabolic adaptation, the body really trying to conserve and hold on to what it has because it's not getting its baseline needs met very well. And so what we've kind of looked at then from a protein perspective is what would we need to do? Can you follow these fasting restricted things and get enough protein? What's going on there? And so the study we did while I was in Arkansas at UAMS, we took this 2-meal paradigm. So a lot of women will transition to the intermittent fasting type situation. I'm going to do a couple meals within like a 9-hour window, skip breakfast, eat in the afternoon. And so we took, I think the age range was like 50 to 70 years, average age maybe like 60, 61. Put them in these three different groups. And so one group ate protein at the RDA, one group ate protein at average US consumption, which is about 1.1 grams per kilogram. And then we did a double the RDA. And so we kind of did a 3-tier approach of then how does that stimulate whole body protein turnover and muscle across a 24-hour period. And the key findings from that study was that double the RDA was really what was required to stay in a positive balance. Both the RDA and even habitual intake of 1.1, those individuals were still in a negative balance over that 24-hour period. And so to offset that, they had to double it. And the thought there is just getting it in that small window wasn't enough to offset probably the heavy breakdown happening in that bigger fasting time period. And so there's a lot of debate about, does nutrient timing across the day really matter? Some people will argue no, and there's data to support that for sure. But it seems once you start moving into this older group where that anabolic resistance is happening, it's probably actually more important to try to space it throughout the day. To get the amount that you need. It's hard to consume that all in one sitting. Most people don't like to consume that much in that short amount of time. But also to offset maybe the heavier breakdown that's happening in those individuals in a fasting period compared to those younger people who are a little more resilient. So some things we've done in other studies, a big part of my dissertation was looking at essential amino acid intake around high intensity interval training. We did this in average age was like 35-ish, but they took essential amino acids pre-post exercise. And just some things we saw there just by doing something like that, where it doesn't add a lot of calories, but I'm getting some fuel, and especially a very muscle stimulating fuel around that exercise. We were able to appropriate stimulate energy expenditure, fat oxidation, especially after the exercise. We also saw an offsetting of like annual age-related muscle loss over like an 8-week period, just by a couple weeks of exercise. But the really cool part was in these women specifically that did the study. If they consumed amino acids before the workout, they also reported a lower rating of perceived exertion. So just by getting a little bit of something before, they felt like they handled the workout better and it wasn't as tiring. It was a difference between like super hard and just hard, but psychologically that's enough to say like, hey, I did that and it was hard, but I did it well, versus like, oh my gosh, that was defeating. And so then when we talk about like consistency and how you feel and that like motivation piece, I think that's huge. So all that to wrap up, I'm not a big fan of fasting for women, especially pre-menopause. I think maybe there's some application post, but we don't have great data on that right now. I think the female body is just way too sensitive, which is a good thing in the survival world, but we're not like surviving for our lives over here. So I think being sensitive to that and trying to work with our body. And that's where I talk to women a lot about, let's focus less on just losing fat, our metabolically active piece. Let's focus on the thing we can actually stimulate, target, and change more directly, which is the muscle. And that then also changes how we think about fueling for our exercise going into it so I can do the workout well. Can I prioritize recovering after? All of those types of things, and just trying to make sure we're fueling our body throughout the day.
This is great. It sounds like the essential amino acids can be helpful in many areas, like you mentioned, the perceived effort lowering, and then it's almost like this notion, like this also helps you recover, things that Bob and I talk about a lot here on the podcast, like it's not only carbohydrate that matters in a pre-workout window. I wondered a couple things, because it is different than traditional sports nutrition guidelines that is still primarily focused on maybe even simple sugars before exercise, but now this area of Well, okay, let's look at amino acids and protein. Could you let our listeners know what the range for aminos, essential aminos, might be if we're looking to consume that versus an intact protein amount and a range to work with? And I know some of our listeners might not be familiar with the numbers. If you want to mention
That's
a few
okay. We'll
foods
cover
that
all
you
of it.
recommend. Yeah.
So my first level answer is really any food will suffice. I think for women especially, I try to emphasize don't overcomplicate it. Go with what you've got, go with what you can do. Also go with what your stomach can handle. Some things are more upsetting to different stomachs than others. So you have to kind of find what's going to work best for you, the timing, and what's going to sit well. So the essential amino acids, I really like for all of those pieces though, because it drinks like a Gatorade. It's really light, it's easy to put down, and we've seen because it digests so fast, gets in the bloodstream, it's super stimulating for muscle. And so as we're headed into that exercise, then it's just a really great synergistic response. I want to throw in the caveat, I start talking about amino acids, people run to the shelves at the store, and they're more likely to find branched chain amino acids than essential amino acids. So just really quick for people listening, branched chain amino acids are only 3 of the essential amino acids. They're really important ones, but they're not, you need all 9 of the amino acids our body can't produce to actually build muscle and fully stimulate muscle. The branched chains will turn it on, leucine's in there to do that, and that's really great, but we really need all 9 to make a significant impact on the muscle. So those essential amino acids contain all 9. You can find those on the internet, and I think they're starting to pop up more in stores, but you really want to make sure it's an essential amino acid supplement. So those are really great. I like to use that immediately pre-post just because it's easier to drink. Now, if you like whey protein's also super great. Probably a little bit cheaper, easier to find. So getting, 15 grams of whey protein pre-post, whatever's going to work well for you. If you can do 30 minutes, that's really great. If you have to back it up a little bit to let it digest, that's okay too. Whatever you got to do. And then if you want to stick to a whole food source, Greek yogurt, or there's now all these great yogurt type options that have higher protein, and honestly, I eat those as I walk to the gym, and they're really easy to get down. So you can pick all those sources. But again, it doesn't need to be huge. From a whole intact protein source, we're talking 10 grams. And amino acids, it's a smaller dose. So we're talking more like 7 to 10 of the powder. But yeah, so doesn't need to be anything too crazy. Just get some fuel in the body. Now, I do say if the goal's fat loss, just protein is probably sufficient. If we're talking about an athlete, we probably want some carbs in there to help with the workout a little bit more. And then I tell everybody, if it's going to be a really hard workout, some carbohydrate is going to be just fine. And that'll help you do the workout well, and that's probably more important. So
that is perfect. And shifting into that, again, you're transitioning really nicely from our questions here, but what about for the plant-based female? So call it vegetarian or vegan. If you want to split them, you can. But are there some concerns, cautions, challenges? What do they need to know?
Oh, yeah. This is I have a whole lecture just on this.
Yeah.
So part of my story is I was also vegan for 4ur years.
Oh, is that when you were running?
That was while I was running.
Interesting. Okay.
So that was an adventure. Things I would do different now, now that I know. But I think it's a big part of why protein especially really intrigues me. There were a lot of things I did wrong. So you can do it. High level vegan vegetarian athletes, you can do it. It's possible. There's just a whole lot more you have to consider, take into account. It's just not as straightforward and easy as if we use animal-based sources. So a big one is just the quality of protein from plant-based sources is just lower. There are high quality plant sources, but it seems regardless, most plant sources are just lacking in some of those essential amino acids, those 9 we talked about. They often are kind of missing or don't have the right amount to really stimulate muscle the same way. And so what I tell everybody, muscle looks like muscle. And so that's why plant or animal sources work really great for stimulating human muscle. Muscles look pretty similar. Our muscles don't look like plants. So when we do plant-based sources, we want to we have to increase the amount of protein. So there, instead of our normal range, We definitely need to push the upper end of that and go closer to 1.6. It seems like if we get at least up to that, we seem to see similar effects as what we see in animal sources. And I would push even higher if I'm exercising, just to make sure I'm covering my bases. We definitely want to work in probably a supplement source. It's hard to consume enough plant-based sources solely from a whole food perspective. Fiber also gets in the way and messes all that digestion up. So doing a really high quality protein supplement is going to be really key. And I say even double that dose. A lot of our like ready to drink plant-based shakes are only about 20 grams. And we gotta like do more than that, in my opinion. So it's really sad because the animal sourced ready to drink shakes are usually like 30 to 40 grams, and the plant-based ones are like 20, and we actually probably need more from that source. So I just tell everybody we've gotta really double that. And then I think the really tricky part, if we're really doing a vegan, vegetarian diet in its true form, we should be consuming a lot of vegetables. And vegetables are hard to consume in high volumes. They're super filling. I tell everybody, actually, this is my wild thing of I would like to see somebody gain weight on just vegetables and protein. Like that would be so filling. It's hard to over-consume that. But if we're doing that, it's hard to consume enough. It's not very calorie dense. So the other piece is getting enough calories to meet your energy needs if you're an athlete or someone doing a whole lot of exercising. So that's something to be careful of. Those are the two things I messed up as an athlete. I didn't know at the time, so I was trying to hit the RDA, which was really not cutting it in any way, shape, or form. I also had a hard time understanding that the volume of food I probably needed to consume was more because I was doing a lot of vegetables. And so had to eat more often. College athlete, like you don't always just have like all the food at your disposal. And so that's where I messed up, and in grad school had a lot of issues. By the time I finished, I think I was overtrained, really fatigued, had a lot of metabolic dysregulation, a lot of brain fog. And so switched back, basically just added protein, animal protein to my vegetable meals in grad school, and over time figured it out. But yeah, so it just, you have to be very careful, and it's hard.
Yeah, and it's kind of a double-edged sword because it does depend on the sport also, right? So as a runner, it will as a female runner versus, let's say, a female volleyball player or soccer player or whatever, like the psychological perception of body is a little different, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like you've got track and field athletes who are really pushing that limit of body mass, right?
Yeah.
But the other side of the double-edged sword is this, because I come across this all the time with my female athletes, my younger female athletes, is, well, the ones who are vegan or vegetarian, right? They're like, well, no, I'm not going to consume animal protein. I'm just going to get enough protein, like to your point, through vegetables, through rice, through all this stuff. And then it gets into the whole, well, you're either going to drive yourself to be in caloric deficit or surplus. Because, I mean, how many, I don't know off the top of my head, how many cups of brown rice does it take to equal the same amount of protein as a 3-ounce chicken breast, right? I mean, it's
unreal.
Copious amounts, right? So then you can get into the, well, you're overeating, but then there's the risk of undereating, right? It's a really delicate balance, isn't it?
Hard. There's actually a good study that did all those comparisons of like, well, what if we match them for calories?
Right.
Well, then like your protein is this much lower, and especially your essential amino acids were lower. Well, then they said, what if we match on protein? But to match the protein and get the essentials up, you are now looking at like a 300, I think, plus calories. So when you're towing that line of calories, and that's where too, to the people trying to maybe lose weight, it's like, oh, this actually could get complicated if we're trying to keep protein high. And then from the athletes, you're playing that game of, so that's actually a really tough, that's a good point. Push and pull.
Let's put your practitioner hat on really quick. Being an NCAA past athletes, track and field, having some challenges back then. You're now a PhD researcher, one of the best. And now, like, someone comes to you, like a female comes to you, and they're like, hey, you know what? I'm either thinking about going vegan or I have been vegan, and I'm trying to be, let's call it premenopausal female, maybe younger, maybe under 40, and they're trying to be successful, whatever that means to them, right? We're not talking NC2A athlete, but they're just trying to be successful in a sport, in recreational sport. Do you, well, I won't set this up. What is your message to them?
Yeah, good question. I think first pass, you're really trying to connect with them and see like, well, why are you thinking this path? And so why do you want to be vegan, vegetarian? That was the first question I got asked of like, why are you doing this first place?
Yep.
And when, we got past that and it was health things and I wanted to be healthy and GI things, whatever. It's like, okay, so we're going to work within that. But then I think really this is where I think the power of education and there's a fear with especially female athletes of sharing too many numbers, especially related to food or related to body composition, that we're all going to then have an eating disorder. And there's real concerns there. I understand that. And I think we need to be aware of those things and cognizant. But from my personal experience, when you withhold that information from female athletes and don't actually just talk them through their body, the importance of muscle, actually appropriate for them, and show them where those numbers came from, that's when they make things up in their head, especially track athletes. We're so in tune with numbers. We think about splits all the time. And so tell me my numbers and what I need to hit, and we'll do it, and we'll probably try to overachieve on it. That's what distance runners do. So I think trying to then talk them through like, okay, based on you, based on your needs, here's your calorie needs. Here's what that needs to look like. Here's why carbohydrates are so important. You can't run fast without carbohydrates. Do you feel really tired all the time? We need this protein to help with the recovery. And then actually by not fueling, we're going to lose some of that really important muscle that you need to perform. You need to run fast. And so then I think trying to help them put it in that context is what I try really hard to do. That's where I would go.
Perfect.
Yeah, the education piece, so important in the context that you're providing. Thank you for that, Dr. Hirsch. We were curious about kind of talking to some misconceptions, misunderstandings, which you kind of just touched on, like one thing doesn't always equal one other thing. There's so much more to the picture. And speaking of calorie deficits or maybe underfueling, even if it's not intentional underfueling or some of that in the scope of low energy availability and REDS, relative energy deficiency in sport. I know there's some talk of like, does REDS exist the way we think in athletes? And I kind of wondered your take on that. From my understanding, some of it's just looking at like the way the research is done to actually diagnose someone with low energy availability. But I wonder if you could speak on that to whatever you're comfortable with. And thank you.
So I'll just say, like, does it exist? That's the higher question. I think it's not that it doesn't exist. But I think what I tend to think happens is that we put it only in the context of a calorie and diet issue, which I think even the group that put out that paper that, the title is Does REDS Exist? I don't know if they, and I won't speak, I'm speaking for them, but from my interpretation of that paper, I don't think they were even saying the concept doesn't exist. But what they were presenting is there's a lot of other things that can lead to the RED-S symptomology. So the real issue with RED-S, right, is there's something causing some type of the body's not getting the calories it needs, or it's in a deficit, and then that's leading to all these performance deficits, the health decline, the spiral of all the things. But what that other group pointed out is diet's one piece to that, but that's also looks very similar to when we just start overtraining and going to high volume for a long period of time. So is it you weren't consuming enough, or was it you were just in a really heavy training period? Those two things go together, right? That's why I wanted to do both of these things. But so that's a piece of it. But it's also then, like, I think of these college athletes, they're also just like they just took finals last week. So they're stressed, they're not sleeping. Is there other life things happening? There's so many other things that can cause that excess stress, that it's not just because I'm not consuming enough. That's one piece of the puzzle. There's a lot of things that add that stress to the body. So I think it's trying to zoom out and look at it from a bigger picture. I will also say, based on how we quantify low energy availability, it's really hard to do well. The three parts of that equation are I have to know your energy expenditure, I have to know your dietary intake, and then get a fat-free mass. So I have a really big background in body comp. We can do the fat-free mass thing pretty well. You've got to get, someone with the devices and all of that, but we can at least measure that pretty well. The energy expenditure, I also think we can do fairly well. If I can now stick a tracker on you and get pretty close to probably what you're expending. We have decent methods there. There's still wiggle room, but how are we going to do that? The diet part is what's, in my mind, kind of loosey-goosey, right? Our best approach here is a diet log. We know people aren't necessarily great at that, even if we talk them through it. And how well can we actually quantify? People even are bad at serving size and the amount that they had. And so that, to me, is where the biggest amount for error happens. And so when we're really thinking about trying to compare energy out and energy in, it just now becomes our range and potential for error in that measure is really high. And so some people do correction factors. Can we just add on so we don't accidentally underpredict? There's now kind of a movement. I'm seeing more people looking at like measured metabolic rate versus predicted metabolic rate. So are we seeing in metabolic suppression? I think that's could reflect maybe more chronic, but I think, I think it's interesting to think through what are different ways we can look at these things, how well can we do it, and trying to keep it in that context. So do I think it's an issue? Yes. Do I think most athletes, especially female athletes, underconsume? Yes. So I think there are things that do need to be addressed, but our methods are tough sometimes.
And in the real world where we don't have access to you or your equipment or your research, it gets even tougher, right? Because you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because then it's just baseline education that we're trying to give them and trying to convince them, like, there are some challenges here. Okay, let me bring it back to protein, Dr. Hirsch. So what I've been hearing you say is you identify that the RDA for protein, daily intake, is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight, right? Okay. So would it be fair, because you've also given us the range, that probably more like 1.2 to 1.6 is probably a better range for a lot of females. So putting all that in context, I'm going to put you on the hot seat real quick.
Okay.
Because we're talking about protein. And you said, you've been kind of saying, we probably aren't meeting our needs. Enter carnivore diet. What are your thoughts? Because I still get this question so much. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on the carnivore diet, which obviously would increase protein intake in the diet.
You're going to crush your protein need on that one for sure. But here's what I always pose to my students. I was like, all right, let's think about it. Carnivore diet. What is good? Yeah, we hit our protein need. Great. I was like, but what's missing from that diet? Big thing is fiber. There's a lot of good things that come from plants and fiber, lots of micronutrients. So really, as we know, any diet that starts to go extreme, right, we run the risk of missing certain micronutrients especially. And so same thing we'll go the other way and go all plants, which is the vegan vegetarian. So I'm always like, all right, so what's the difference here? If I go all the way plants versus all the way meat. The issue, if we go all the way plant, right, I'm still missing things that we only find in meat. Those essential amino acids, the B12, the zincs, the magnesiums, things that are harder to get. And the iron, that's a huge one for female athletes. So when we swap all the way over to then the carnivore, right, same thing. There's so many things that you just then miss out on. Regularity, so can you do it? Sure. I really wouldn't recommend that one necessarily, but yeah.
So it's funny because when an athlete asks me that or a person asks me that, what do you think about carnivore diet? I'm going to go on it. Then my next question to them before an answer is, well, do you like liver and brain and heart and testicles and kidneys? And if you're going to kind of eat, no, seriously, right? If you can eat those, all right, maybe we continue our discussion. But if not, it's not just just like eating a steak and chicken breast, right?
Exactly. Ooh. People don't think through those caveats.
A lot of light bulbs turn on all of a sudden. Yeah. And I don't know, we have one more question for you, Dr. Hirsch, before we kind of transition to the our high five segment. But I don't know that this is a quick one. So I was thinking of those women maybe in even perimenopause, postmenopause. I'm seeing just a lot more women choose to do the GLP-1 type of medication to promote fat loss and, like quote unquote, finally achieve body comp goals. In the athlete scope though, and as we're talking about protein, which we know can be so filling and like these higher needs that might be more optimal to preserve muscle and all the other benefits you touched on, what is your thought, or do you have concerns or things that you think about for those that maybe are in the contemplative stage to make that decision?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing we're seeing is, are we also considering, right, the muscle in all of this? Does it work for fat loss? Yeah, the data seems like it's working and it's doing something. I've done studies with bariatric surgery patients, so I've seen that weight loss. And this, you're not having a major surgery to produce that and totally having to uproot your life and change your diet. And so I think there's a lot of bonuses to that. And especially when we're talking about people that really need to lose some body fat, when you're on that farther end of the spectrum, some of that helps with getting the ball rolling. And how do we help that process for sure? I think what gets left out of the equation, and this happens with bariatric surgery as well, people see it a little bit as a quick fix. It's easy, I just have to take it and it's working, but they're not making the lifestyle changes to sustain it. And so with it, we are seeing that there's muscle loss that comes with that. So with that, if you're losing muscle, we're losing that metabolic engine going on. And so I think if we don't, as far as I know, have data, what if we really pair it with a well-done exercise program, prioritize resistance training, really prioritize maintaining muscle? Are we prioritizing protein? So I think those are parts of the equation we haven't fully addressed or necessarily have consolidated data on. I would imagine that would be helpful and beneficial, especially for long term. So I think if you're using it as a quick fix, once you stop, are we just going to rebound and gain it back? I think that's where we're trying to watch where things go. But also already knowing what we know, we can offset that, and that would be prioritizing the exercise and protein.
Yeah, it's interesting because some groups are now, in groups I mean like training facilities and stuff, have GLP-1 training programs now. So why I mention that is because it's interesting, because I think everyone's getting a little bit on the bandwagon now of saying, wow, it's not just a GLP-1 medication, or you know what I mean? It's we have to combine these lifestyle changes at the same time. So they're taking the steps to educate these people, which I think is great, because it's not just a one and done kind of thing. Yeah, I kind of feel like I hear what you're saying. I kind of feel like there's a lot more work to be done in that space, especially looking at the continued nutrition and exercise training alterations.
I think that part will be fascinating. What do we need to do after?
Exactly. And we're still such in the infancy, right? I mean, this is just in the beginnings, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Hirsch, we're going to thank you. We're going to jump right into our high five questions, which we never tell our guests what they are, because this is a time where our listeners get to know you a little bit behind the scenes. But these are just rapid fire. The first thing that comes to your mind when you want to answer it, go for it. But we're going to just offset our questions. We've got 5 for you to kind of, obviously it's the high five, right? Giving you a virtual high five. But first one for you, what's your favorite way to start the day? How do you get your day going in the morning?
Yeah, so my thing right now is I get up, I like to make my cup of coffee, and this was a small thing I did recently, but I purchased remote controlled candles. And
wow.
It's really great. You can get them on Amazon, but then I have these little tea lights strategically around my living room. So I can just click one button and they all light, so I don't have to walk around and light them all. But we turn on those little candles and I sit on the couch, enjoy my coffee, and just enjoy the morning coming. I have a cat as well who I adore, and she usually cuddles with me. And so we just have a little bit of time, quiet time in the morning before we dive into what all to-day holds. So that's my
super
favorite
cool.
way to start
That's
today.
tech-free, just kind of getting in the ambience, right?
Really hard to, at least do 15, 30 minutes without the tech for a second.
Nice.
So.
That's amazing. Ooh, yay. I was curious for question number 2, do you have a hobby that not many people know about, or secret, not secret, but a thing you do that just a lot of people don't know that you enjoy?
Gosh, I could go a lot of ways with this. I feel like some of my hobbies too have had to morph because I spend so much time in research things. But I have a very artistic, creative side. And so I funnel that now into presentations and posters and figures for my research. But I do like to be creative, to create art. I like to think about how do I visually communicate things. We live in such a visual world now. So that's something that's a fun thing for me to do.
Love it.
Cool.
Okay, number 3, I'm assuming that you still train at some type of level, and I'm going to use training as aerobic and or anaerobic. So what is your favorite pre-training food or beverage? And you can qualify this based on the training if you'd like.
Yeah. Lately I've been doing just like a vanilla Greek yogurt as I walk over to do resistance training.
Okay.
Our lab is across the street, and so usually as I'm packing up, I start eating it and finishing it on the way over there. I also, before I'll do the essential amino acids, that's the easiest. My stomach's a little more sensitive, so we'll get that down. After, though, was that part of the question?
Well, you can certainly add it. Go for it.
I
Yes.
have stronger desires after.
Yeah.
I like to keep it really simple and light, just because my stomach. After, one of my favorite things is to do like a big breakfast. So like on Saturdays, if I do a longer run, sometimes I'll either make the eggs and ham and a bagel, or my favorite thing really is cinnamon rolls. That's a quick way to my heart. So we have a cinnamon roll deli just down the street from my house. That's
What?
on a special day.
Wowza.
I'll go visit the cinnamon roll deli and pick up a really nice homemade cinnamon roll. So
I've never heard of a cinnamon roll deli, but I'm
Yeah.
imagining it, and it sounds amazing.
it's everything you think it should
Yes.
be.
Okay.
When I moved here, I was like, I'm in the right place. So
Nice. Well, geez, I'm not sure how rapid fire, but let's see. Dr. Hirsch, supplements that you take? Is this a
Yeah.
long list?
take a number of things.
Okay.
So I take creatine. I take that twice a day. There's great research on that,
Yes.
not just for muscle, but also I think I take it more for the brain, the potential benefits, offsetting that sleep deprivation, helping with cognition, focus. So I take that twice a day. And then I take vitamin D, I take omega-3, I take ashwagandha before I go to bed with magnesium to help with some sleep quality. I found those work well for me. And yeah, those are the key ones. Sometimes a multi, that rotates on and off. Sometimes an iron that rotates on and off. But those are the key ones.
Perfect. And last but not least, number 5, if you only had one piece of advice to give to athletes, only one, what would that one piece of advice be?
Consistency. I'm thinking of all these women. I think sometimes I would say consistency and keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate all of it. So being consistent in exercise is more important than anything else. And then trying to make those small nutrition changes. So even if it's just starting with post-exercise, can I make sure I consistently get a good post-exercise up with recovery? Then we can move to pre-exercise. Can I consistently get a good pre-exercise? But don't jump straight to all the crazy timing, and don't make it hard on yourself. There's plenty of things, especially women, have to think about in a day's time. So just consistency and do what you can.
Perfect.
Beautiful. Wise. Thank you so much, Dr. Hirsch. I mean, we are so grateful for you, and we'll put all your info in the show notes for people who want to connect with you or follow you. And gosh, we look forward to all the research to come from your lab and all the work you've done today. It is amazing. Thank you for all you do.
Yeah, well, and
And
it was great talking to both of you. Thank you so much. This was such a good combo.
thank you.
Thank
and
you.
Yes, grateful. And listeners, thanks for tuning in to this episode. Let us know comments and questions, things that come your way after hearing this episode with Dr. Hirsch. And we will look forward to having you on join us for our next episode. So thank you, Dr. Hirsch, and hope you have a wonderful day.
You as well.